Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces. My name is Stephanie Edmonds. Welcome to Teaching Liberty. And it's Pride Month. So naturally, we need to talk about our public schools because we know that that is one of the main centers from which they disseminate all of that pride. And while they're focused on that, of course, the state of our schools is I guess, shall we say, not so great. And while teachers on different sides of the aisle don't seem to agree about much, they definitely agree about that. We are going to go through the data, but I have with me here a actual public school teacher in the flesh. Delvin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie. You know I'm a fan, so it's awesome to actually be here to speak to you and your wonderful audience.
Yeah, I appreciate you, man. Always checking in on the live streams, always leaving thoughtful comments. So I appreciate that. And I wanted to have you on here. We met last year at the Teacher Freedom Foundation conference out in Colorado, and you had always very insightful and funny. You're a funny guy, which I just I just caught on your screen name is terrible, like terrible. I needed you to say it for me in your accent, in your southern accent, and then I was like, "Oh, I get it. Terrible schools." So, before I have some data here. I have some articles that I wanted to share just to kind of like contextualize our conversation. But as soon as we got on here, you were giving me some of your hot takes about schools. So, just start us off. What is your big picture of the public school system, how we got here, and what your outlook is for the future?
Wow, that's quite loaded.
Hey,
I
listen, I don't take it easy here on this channel. You should know that.
I mean, to say when it started, if you consider the Marxist idea of the long march through the institution, definitely far before you and I were born. One of the things that seem apparent is a lot of the radicals from the 1960s. Some of them even went to jail, and when they came out, they became university professors and continued to propagate their theology. And I call it a theology because it is a religion. These people generally preach atheism, but in that void where God actually feels, they instead put their Marxist ideas into it.
And how do you see that playing out in, because we all have our idea of what Marxist means, but how do you actually see that playing out in the school system, in your classroom?
So the way that I see it playing out is because the classical Marxists, they differentiate between the working class and the owner class, the rich and the poor. And what this new version of Marxism is, they differentiate between all types of, it's like 60 shades of a person. Me, I'm black, I wear glasses, I have a blue shirt on, I have plants in the background, I'm a teacher. So I can continue all of these categories, which I'm part of, and they emphasize those individual, mostly immutable characteristics, and they highlight those instead of a person entirely. So basically, I think that they're trying to cater to the kids for the now and not for the future.
Right. Yeah. One of the things before we went live, you were saying that they've kind of done away with a lot of the different classes at the based on, I guess, your heterogeneous abilities. Oh no, they are heterogeneous and they're not homogeneous, right? So they're not putting the kids in the class that's appropriate for them. They're just saying, well, everybody needs to know calculus, and they put all the kids in the calculus class, even the ones who don't know their multiplication tables. And so it holds back the kids who should be in the calculus class, and it doesn't serve the kids who shouldn't be in the calculus class. So I think that plays a lot into the things that you were talking about. Is they're looking at all these different characteristics of the kids and putting value on those rather than the actual academic pieces that they're supposed to be really there to do, the reading, writing, arithmetic.
Absolutely. And to me, when they encourage and foster this victimhood, they, especially when it comes to behavior, there's definitely not enough accountability for students. I was speaking to a former colleague recently, and she told me about a situation about a cell phone. There was a kid who came in. She asked for the phone. The kid didn't want to give the phone, so she called one of the, let's just call them the muscly men, to say, "Hey, give me that phone." So kid gives up the phone. So the administration typically says, "Okay, well, we're going to keep your phone." Well, the next day she sees the kid has the phone again and is like, "Wait a minute, what's up with this?" And the kid basically says, "Well, all I got to do is just act up a little bit and they'll give me what I want." So my colleague isn't one of these people who's just going to roll over for injustice in the classroom. So she goes to the administration and says, "Hey, uh, this is what happened, and there wasn't any consequences." And they said to her, "Well, no, it was your fault, because according to our policy, you weren't the one who got the phone, it was somebody else. And because it wasn't you personally who got the phone, then we couldn't apply those consequences."
Right. Okay. Yeah, we're definitely seeing these behavior, like what did they call it? The restorative justice, and a lot of it I think has to do with the fact that administration is so heavily judged on the outcomes of students. So if you're not if kids don't have certain grades, if you have so many kids in disciplinary scenarios, they're like, "Well, what's wrong with your school? Why are all these things happening?" I remember when I was teaching, I was in a pretty good school, especially as far as discipline went. But when it came to grades, for sure, like if you had a certain amount of kids in your class that weren't passing, they were like, "All right, well, what do we have to do to get these kids passing?" And they would bring them in on Saturday schools, and they would create like special courses, or you could give them a packet, or they could take some like online, what did they call it? They called it I forget what the system was called, but they could like take the class online and complete it for the credit online, almost like simultaneously. And of course, the online course is a bunch of nonsense. They're not actually learning. They can just like click buttons. And anyways, so there's all sorts of ways for sure that things are being watered down just so that schools can look good. But we know from the data that the kids are learning less and less prepared for whether it's the job market or going on to college. And most teachers seem to agree. I actually just want to go through some data here that I have from the Pew Research Center. And it doesn't seem like we can agree on a lot in this country, but there's very high agreement. A vast majority of teachers, 82%, and this is across both political parties, say that the overall state of public education has gotten worse in the last 5 years. And they also say that they expect it to be worse 5 years from now. So not a lot of hope here among the teachers. I guess 16% are not sure where it's going to be going. But I found these numbers quite astounding.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. One of the metrics that I like to use regarding education is the international PISA scores. Um, they measure performance for over 80 countries. And so when you look at a lot of things held constant, when you see these scores and how kids are performing around the world, it can give you a snapshot of what's really going on. For example, they say that in 2022 compared to 2018, students around the world, their reading scores fell 10 points and their math scores fell 15 points.
Yep.
And it even gotten worse for other countries such as Iceland and Germany, who fell by 25 points.
Delvin, you know what? You froze up. Can you do me a favor and just refresh your browser? You'll be able to come right back in.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. All right, so while he's refreshing and getting back in here, let's just keep going through some of the data here because, as I was saying, this is across both political parties. It says teachers who are Democrats and Democrat leaning independents are as likely as Republicans and Republican leaning teachers to say that the state of education is worse than it was 5 years ago. So this is across the spectrum. There is a little bit of difference in where they place the blame or which party they see as better for perhaps improving it. So it says Democratic teachers are more likely than Republican teachers to point to the current political climate, which I found interesting. I mean, it's not that big of a gap. It's 65 to 54. But as Delvin was pointing out here, I feel like Republican teachers, now I'm not sure if he's Republican or not, but I feel like this is definitely more of a Republican thing to say, well, look at the infiltration of these Marxist and communist ideas through our institutions, and it's just trickling down into education. So I did find that somewhat interesting, but I think the next part might speak a little bit to this because when they're asked about which party that they trust to do a better job, most of them say, or a third say, they don't trust either party. A sizable share say they trust neither party, there we go, to shape curriculum, but more teachers say that they trust the Democratic Party. So I'm gonna guess that those are Democratic teachers saying they trust the Democratic Party, and probably those independents are more likely to say they trust the Democratic Party. And that, I think that mostly comes down to funding, right? Democrats are known about funding schools, and there's this idea that if we just fund our schools better, then they'll do better. I don't always think that is the case. I often think the more money we give them, the more they waste it, the more they put it up with those administrators. It doesn't actually make it to the classrooms. It says only about 1 in 10 teachers say they trust the Republican Party to do a better job in these areas. So there is some difference here again when you get down into the who trusts what party. But because it gets so ideological and tribal, I think that really the number we should be more focused on is this one up here, is just the vast majority of teachers in general say the overall state of public education is getting worse, and over half of them are saying that they expect it to continue getting worse in the next 5 years. Not looking so great there for our teachers. I mean, if the ones who are in the classrooms teaching our kids don't have a lot of hope and a lot of faith, it's not really so great for our kids, right? We want the people who are teaching our kids to feel like what they're doing makes a difference, to feel like there is hope for the future. And if they don't have hope for the future, then I'm not sure how we can expect our kids to have hope. I wonder where Delvin is. Let's see, because all he had to do was hop back in here, but that's okay. We're going to keep going. While we wait for him to come back in here and talk a little bit more about his experience in the classroom, what he's seeing, his hope, his and expectations for American education. Also, he's running for office, so I definitely want to hear about that. I have a couple more articles here that I wanted to go through because while there seems to be less and less hope for public education, we are seeing a huge increase in homeschooling, in the rise of homeschooling. And this is not just in the US, but this is also in the UK. Oh, and here's Delvin. So we'll bring him back in. All right, made it back in. Oh, did you switch over to your phone?
Yeah, I don't know what's the deal, but when one thing messes up, we got to let the show keep going, right?
Yeah, listen, that's that teacher skills right there, right? One thing doesn't go, you just make it happen with something else. So, glad to have you back. I had just went through the rest of that article and talked about some of the political party differences, about which party they trust more, and there was some differences there. But I wanted to kick it back to you and talk about more about like what are your hopes for the future? Like, do you have hope for the future, right? Because over half of the teachers in that survey said, hey, I don't think it's going to get better in the next 5 years. So what are your expectations for these next 5 years, or whatever timeline that you want to put it along?
Well, considering in these United States of America, we have 50 different experiments on education. Because of that, I believe we are going to see some success stories and others are going to either fail or continue to experience mediocrity. And so, here in Kentucky, in November on the ballot is going to be an initiative to decide if we want to have school choice. And I really believe that school choice is one of those things, not the solution, but it's a solution for families who are trapped in dangerous situations where there are bullies that the public schools protect, where their kids know that they're not going to get the learning that they deserve because of unruly kids that stop them from an education. Our kids deserve better than this. And right now, parents are screaming mad, but we have the entire weight of the public school system itself, which does not want to have any competitors and uh, who want to perpetuate the bureaucracy that they already have going on. You also have the teachers union that is 99% donating to Democrats, who also you're going to be fighting against, along with the mega media machine. And so, with all of these factors, it's really going to be tough to decide on where Kentucky is going to end up. And I find it quite fascinating that the same people who say that they really love minorities, black and brown people, people of color, or whatever they want to say, those are the same people who want to, by policy, keep kids in dangerous and failing schools and not give them an alternate chance to go somewhere else.
Well, that's very good to hear that there's school choice on the ballot. I like how you also framed it of, you don't think it's the solution, but it's a solution. And as we've seen, as you described, how the Marxists and the leftists, they really understand the long game, right? They don't allow the good or the okay to be the enemy, or they don't allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good or the okay. They're willing to take half measures and go step by step. And I know that there are people out there who say, oh, school choice is just still, it's connected to the government. It's government money. You're going to have to do what they say. But I don't think that we can allow the perfect to be the enemy, or yes, this to be the enemy. We need to take these little step by steps, take what we can get, try to break up this monopoly, as you were saying. Do you know what type of scheme of that they're going to go for? Because I know in some states they have these savings accounts. I know in other states they'll give you a certain amount, like $7,000 or $13,000. In some states they have online options. Do you know more about what is being put on the ballot and the scheme that they're going to try there?
The first thing they need to do is to make sure that people vote for that. to have that change in the Constitution.
Oh, it has
So
to be changed. Okay, got you.
yeah, so without that, you can come up with 80 schemes to Sunday, and it won't matter a hill of beans.
Okay, so you guys have to get it in your constitution, and then you can take the next step to decide how exactly it might be implemented. All right.
Correct.
Okay. It's interesting that it's written into your constitution that you can't have school choice. Is there a teacher union presence in Kentucky, and what is that like?
Oh, absolutely. We not only have KEA, but we also have another one, uh, Kentucky United 120 or something.
Okay, so
And
the KEA is the Educators Association. I'm assuming that's NEA.
yeah, and the other one that I named is really the AFT.
Okay, and the other one's
And
AFT. So you got a little bit of both of the two big guys.
yeah, but to me, they both have the same purpose. They are jobs programs for adults, and they care very little about actual education for kids, because if they did, they wouldn't fight so hard to keep bad teachers in schools. They would have no problem getting rid of tenure. And I think that that's one of the other demographics that I didn't mention that would also fight against school choice is the teachers themselves, because just like the movie The Matrix, you have people who will fight to continue the system because that's all they know. But one of the things that I do like about your channel is that you try to reach people on their commonalities. One of the things you said is both sides can admit that this is terrible, and we can also agree that teachers aren't paid enough. Now, the problem is when you run up against reality, teachers, for the most part, are government employees. So it's basically just rhetoric to suggest that we're going to average $100,000 per teacher, because that would, by default, mean a hefty tax increase that people aren't willing to bear for education. Now, the school system themselves, they aren't willing to concede that they're bloated and full of bureaucracy and waste. So again, they're going to fight against it too.
Right. Yeah. I wish I had prepared to get the chart, but you guys can go look it up out there. If you see the increase in funding that's gone to schools, and then you see the way that the school system has grown, it's like 80% of the growth, or some really high percentage of the growth, has happened in the administration level, and that money's not actually reaching the teachers in the classrooms.
Oh, absolutely. And if you think about the other thing you asked about schools in 5 years,
Yeah.
I think that one of the, what I feel like is a relative easy predictor is those districts and schools that actually get rid of DEI, not those who keep DEI and call it other names. As Shakespeare once famously said, a rose by any other name. And so we have to make sure to uh, measure students by their ability and get rid of these ridiculous univariate notions of why disparities exist. For example, when policies are created to basically say, we're not going to punish black kids because it's racist. Well, then you let every black kid who wants to be bad pass just because they're black. And you see this play out in the real world with these soft on crime DAs who basically release murderers, rapists, and the worst kinds of people. And you have people who want to fight to keep these people on the street instead of behind bars.
And how do you see this impacting your community? Or I don't know what the demographics are in your school specifically. Do you teach in a place that's like super diverse? Or, I mean, I used to teach in the Bronx, so my school was basically 100%. I think we had like two white students in the whole school. So we there it, you couldn't see it in a racial sense in my school, like, because all the kids were, students of color. How does that play out in your school, or how do you see it playing out in your district more broadly?
Okay, so my school is an anomaly in that I teach at an alternative school.
Okay.
So the kids at my school get there because they are court ordered to be there, because they're kicked out of another school, or they are released from a juvenile detention facility. So we have a majority Black population, followed by Hispanics, then whites, then other. And I say then other because you rarely find um, people of Middle Eastern descent or Asian descent gracing the halls of my school. And so when people generically want to say people of color are oppressed, well, I wonder why it is that those people of color barely find their ways into the neighborhood school that I work in versus the ones who actually find themselves in our hallways.
Okay. So it's, yeah, I guess you work in a place of students who couldn't make it, but as you can see, I mean, it plays out demographically in a certain way, but I would argue it's probably because there was a lack of accountability at all the other points before, until it came to that breaking point when there was no other choice but to send them to this alternative school.
Oh, I agree with you. The average high schooler, I teach financial literacy and world history, and the average high schooler reads on a fourth grade level. So one of the problems is the system expects our kids to still perform at a high level. So we, for some reason, decided this year that we were going to weigh students on an 80-40 basis, where 80% of their grade is based off of tests and 20% for daily work. Now, when you consider these are the kids who are likely to not do work on a daily basis, and you're going to basically reward them for not doing work on a daily basis. However, if you make the standards rigorous enough, then students will try to match that level of rigor. So just because I work in a school that is considered the end of the school to prison pipeline, it doesn't mean that I lose my responsibility to these students and these families who are dependent on me to help their kids, not just to manage the school life, but way beyond that.
And so what are some of the ways that you think that, whether it's your school or just more generally speaking, if we want to be in a better place in 5 years? So we have the school choice as something that is happening. Of course, it's not going to be available to everybody, and there's still a bunch of steps, at least in your state, to actually implementing it. But what are some things that a principal could implement at the school level, or a superintendent can decide that they're going to do to change their district around? I know here in my district, we're having a lot of these same issues, and instead of doing what I would think would be a better solution, they're doing more of the things that you're saying. They're making daily work less important, and saying, well, if they just hit some level of mastery by the end of the year, they're taking weight off of attendance. And so if you're basically, I think the classes now are like 85 minutes long, and if you come before the second half of the class, you're good, right? It's like you can still get your attendance for that class, even though before the classes were only 40 minutes long period. So it's like you've already missed like a whole class, but you can still get your attendance for that class. And they've increased greatly the number of absences that you can have. So they're doing all these sorts of things, which I think is, I don't know if I would call it the opposite, but certainly not the direction we should be moving in. What are some of the things we could implement to start moving in the right direction from your perspective?
Good old fashioned discipline. Administrators need to get the testicular fortitude to suspend and expel students. Right now, one of the things that really isn't talked about a lot in education is the disparity between women and men in the profession. And I think that there is something to that. And I'm not saying that we need to do a diversity swap or nothing like that. But when you have these big old boys who otherwise, if that wasn't for their behavior, would be recruited for Alabama football. Now, when you are a woman, as we understand the real word of a woman to be, you are typically nowhere near as strong to take on these guys. And they know it. So you're going to have to, at some point, get the physicality back into schools. Now, trust me, there are plenty of old school women, and like my mama, 5'2", 5'3", but man, she'll slap you in the next week. You listen, I am a grown man and I don't even think cuss words around my mother, okay? So those women exist. But all I'm saying is, for the women who are in the school system who are incapable of meeting that type of behavior threat that exists, then they need to be replaced.
Okay, so I mean, I'm assuming you're not saying that we should have corporal punishment of students. I'm assuming you're just saying it's like an intimidation factor, right? It's different. And I certainly could see that. I used to have a co-teacher who was more your size, like over 6 feet tall. He used to play football for some college team, and he would have gone out to the pros if he didn't bust his knee. And it's definitely different when he is just has his presence in the classroom. Now, I don't think that I give off like, super small energy presence, but it's just different, right? So I think that has something to do with it. I also think too, like you said, kids are coming into high school reading at the fourth grade level, right? How can you expect a kid who cannot read at ninth, 10th, 11th grade level where they should be to do anything other than misbehave in class, right? They cannot understand what is going on in that class. And so one of my thoughts is that we need to have intensive interventions. We need to have academies where these students are put into so that they can get those underlying skills that they need. And I used to teach at this place called 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. We would have kids for varying lengths of time, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 24 weeks, depending on the student's needs. And they had intensive intervention, and we could usually get them, if not up to grade level, approaching grade level, making significant improvements in a relatively short period of time so that they could go back to school and perform at a place where their peers were. Like, what do you think about something like that in terms of addressing the academic side of things? Because even if there is a big guy in class like you and like their behavior gets somewhat under control, there's still the academic piece.
Oh, absolutely. There's several issues with the public schools, and addressing behavior to me is just at the top of the list, because it's just like Maslow's hierarchy. If you don't take care of behavior, then none of the other stuff even matters. So once you take care of behavior, then the academics can start. When you send a message that you're here to learn, you're not here to goof off, you're not here for social time. And if you're not here to learn, then we're going to send you somewhere else, but you're not going to waste taxpayer money. And there has to be a come to Jesus moment, because at the end of the day, resources are finite, and it doesn't serve the public well when we are currently $34 trillion in debt. And as they say, keep throwing good money after bad. One of the things that we cry about in education is to continually say we're underfunded. And as you know, we're not underfunded. We just waste so much of the money.
And now, my understanding is that you are running for public office locally. And
That's correct.
so, yeah, so, and you're talking a lot about public money and for, sort of like the taxpayers and stuff. What are you running for? Is it connected at all to what you're doing in the classroom? And what is your vision for what you might do if you're elected?
I am running for a city commissioner here in Frankfort, Kentucky. And the way that it relates to what I do in the classroom is that I'm a social studies teacher. I teach financial literacy and world history. And that's one of the things that I plan to bring to the city commission, because we seem to not understand what it means to prioritize budgets. And right now, for example, our police force is short staffed. And it makes sense to me that we would want to use public funds to shore up the public safety effort before, let's say, vanity projects or pork barrel projects that are going to benefit specific families or people's friends.
Okay, yeah, for sure. I mean, I know a lot of places around the country aren't so great with their budget. Would you, so is city commissioner, is that like city council?
Yes.
Okay, so what about your schools? Would you be able to influence the policy for your schools, or I guess it would be like the budget for your schools and have oversight into how your board of education is spending their money and giving them feedback on their policies at all?
No, I teach in Lexington, Kentucky. I live in
Okay,
Frankfort, Kentucky.
okay,
And so, even here in Frankfort, the schools have their own, they're their own entity. And so the city really doesn't have anything to do with uh, those governing boards of education. Here in Frankfort, we have two of them, Franklin County and the Frankfort Independent System. And so neither one of those are influenced by the city commission directly.
okay. I see, I see. So you would be just using your understanding of civics and finances and bringing that to there. Okay, I understand. I know,
Absolutely.
for us, we have a board of representatives, which is like our city council, and I know they can do like oversight on some of the budget kind of stuff. They can tell them that no, you can't have a 10% raise. Maybe you should cut this or cut that. We're actually having a round of cuts. They're going to have to get rid of some teaching positions and actually a bunch of stuff they added during the pandemic with all those pandemic funds that they weren't supposed to add teaching positions with. They were supposed to give intensive tutoring and intervention, and they just broke the rules and did whatever they wanted. So, what else? Do you have? What's your like stump speech when you're going out trying to get people to vote for you? What are the issues that you see out in your county besides policing?
Well, you have to think about it like this. Politics are often driven by news cycles, because the average person goes to work and they come home, they pay bills, wash, rinse, and repeat. And so rarely are people able to make an accurate connection between the people who are in office and the policies they create. So a lot of times people will complain about bad roads or sanitation or this department, that department, but have no idea that it was the people who they voted for that are responsible for their life's misery. And I also find it fascinating that people pay far more attention to the presidential election of Biden and Trump and little to their local government. And the things that Biden and Trump do have to go through so many channels to filter down and affect us, whereas your local government can affect you at their next meeting.
All right. So teaching civics in the classroom, teaching civics in your local community. I love it. I'm always preaching the local, local, local. Speaking of local, what about the homeschooling scene? Because that's sort of like really where I'm putting a lot of my local energy, is not necessarily, I'm still trying to do the politics and support politics, but more and more I'm seeing the solution in outside of government in creating our own voluntary communities. So do you see a lot of movement in the homeschooling in your area?
Yes, the homeschool movement has been going on for some time, and I support parents for making that bold choice. One of the what I call it excuses for some parents is they say, I can't afford it. Um, I think that there are plenty of people who make it work if their priority in the home is education. One of the books that I read to my kids from is Booker T. Washington's Up from Slavery. And this is because today we have people who have a fetish for American slaves. And so, with these people and their fetish, I like to bring out one of their own, the slave who can talk about his slave experience. Well, it just so happens in that book, he mentions that one of the most important things for Black people all over who are enslaved people after slavery was to read. And he said that when they started schools, you had to turn people away because there was so many folks signing up. And when you think about that time, there wasn't government schools for Black people. Black people took it upon themselves to say, we know education's important and we're going to put a priority on it. Whereas today, the state says, we're going to tell parents what's important. When you think about the same people who make these policies, they also have underlying beliefs that I think undermine students' performance. For example, when you keep telling Black and brown kids that they are part of an underserved group, they are part of a minority group, these things, I believe, subconsciously tell them that they're not good enough, even though these are the same people who will sit there. Oh, wait, Joe Biden did that at Morehouse lately, so my bad.
I saw this phenomena a lot in my class where I so I had my students read two essays. One of them was the Nicole Hannah Jones essay, and then one of them was, I'm forgetting his name right now, but it was sort of like it was supposed to be a foil to that. So one is sort of like this American racism narrative, and then the other one is we're all individuals and we can succeed, regardless of what our immutable characteristics are. And then I gave my students the choice. They could write a personal narrative about themselves, sort of like Nicole Hannah Jones did, or they could pick somebody from history and write a narrative about them. And most of them chose a personal narrative, and all of them wanted to talk about how America was so racist. And when I met with them to conference about their essay, I'd be like, okay, well, what's an experience you had in your life? Like, why do you want to write about this? And they would all say, well, on the news, I'm always seeing all of this racist stuff. Like, I personally haven't had, I had a couple students who definitely had a story that, could perhaps was in that vein, but most of the vast majority of them didn't actually have a personal story. They actually had like an American dream story where they're like, well, my parents came here as an immigrant and they worked their way up from nothing. And so yeah, as you were saying, the news and this narrative, it definitely subconsciously gets into your head, and I think you start telling yourself stories. But I loved that you brought the Booker T. Washington thing out for your students. What are some other things you do in your classroom to try to fight against that narrative and try to help your students see the value in education generally, or in whatever the topic is that you're teaching?
Well, one of the things that I think will cure a lot of racist ills is when people learn to put money in their pockets. When people have money in their pockets, the only color they care about is green. And so when people are forced to become more animalistic and savage, then the more base ideas are going to permeate. And so, I think that it's important to not only teach kids about an objective like I do with financial literacy, and in that, I teach kids about Jim Rickards. I teach about current economists. I talk about Adam Smith. I talk about what communism is, what socialism is. And when I do these things, I don't say, hey, listen, kids, this is a failure. Well, I will just provide the evidence and they normally figure it out for themselves. So I think that what typically happens is in teachers nowadays have so many responsibilities placed upon us from all of these 90 levels of administration that very little time is actually left to teach. Therefore, it leaves us open to become victims of the automatic pilot teaching, where you get the textbook, you get the disc, you get the section review questions, the answer keys, the test, the answer keys, and it's easy to just put those things in and give it to students and not give a second thought. We're supposed to be experts in our field. So the other thing that I bring to the classroom is by using primary sources when I can. And when it comes to history, to tell kids about things in context. So, for example, in world history, we don't just start that Black people was slaves, nobody else was slaves, massa boss. No, we talk about the Babylonians. We talk about the Aztecs. We talk about the Comanche and the Apache. So the kids know history within context, which I do believe break down a lot of those false narratives. And the other thing that I do is I encourage students to argue with me and to debate with me, but I tell them you need your facts. Bring your facts. What are your sources?
Right. I think for sure when teachers just stand up there and they kind of do like the faux expertise of like, well, I know the thing and you're just supposed to sit there and listen to it, that can be kind of unmotivating. And then there's the teachers who they try to be cool and they try to be open, but then they're just giving them like this narrative, right? They're not allowing them to truly explore the ideas. They're leading them down a very specific path. But I think, as you said, when you come and you truly are an expert and not just like, I know and you need to learn, but you're passionate and the kids can see your passion, and you don't just give them the answers, you give them sets of facts and varied perspectives for them to sort through and then have that argument with them. I would often do the thing where, I would argue one side and then the kids would be like, oh yeah, okay. And then I would flip over and I would do the devil's advocate and they'd be like, wait, what's the right answer? What do you really think? And I'm like, no, 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 no. You're supposed to figure that out. Of course, at the end of the day, I'm supposed to be preparing them for the state exam where they have to choose like A, B, C, or D and write a highly stylized essay or formalized essay. But I really think to get them to be able to choose A, B, C, or D effectively and write that essay effectively, you have to bring the passion, you have to bring your expertise and some authority, right, to the classroom so that the kids are actually there to listen and to learn and not just hang out and try to be your friend.
Absolutely. It's my job to teach kids how to think and not what to think. So for example, I was teaching kids about the Bay of Pigs situation and Khrushchev and Kennedy. And I then talked to them about the state of NATO after World War II and the level of NATO countries right now. I don't have to tell the kids, look here, look at these they're able to draw those connections themselves. Like, hold on now. We got mad because Russia got too close to us. Now Russia mad because we getting too close to them, right?
And now they understand about 90% more than most Americans do about the Russia-Ukraine tensions, war that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. If it was us, we wouldn't like it.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a great example. It's one that I try to use when I talk about the Russia-Ukraine situation. I guess it's more than a situation. It's like a war that's going on over there. But yeah, I mean, we would freak out if Russia was, coming over and trying to set up their weapons in Cuba or in Mexico or whatever, even if they were just somewhere down in South America, right? We would not be having that. So it's a great example. And yeah, definitely bringing in those current events is another way, especially in history, that you can get kids to get into a topic and to understand the relevance of a topic and to get excited about something that happened 50 or 100 or 250 years ago.
Yeah, I think that it's important because I like to teach thematically because, genetically, humans are pretty much the same for thousands of years. And the thing that has changed the most is technology and our reaction to it. And so today we are going through a screen crisis.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let's talk about technology a little bit here.
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah, tell me about what you think technology has done to the classroom. What has there been positive aspects? What are the negative aspects? What would you like to see the direction of technology in the classroom go?
I talked about it a little bit earlier with the automatic pilot teachers. That's bad because it doesn't help to create content specialists. You just have basically corporate drone mouthpieces at that point who at some point lose the ability to critically think for themselves. So by default, how can they teach critical thinking to their students? As I mentioned earlier, of course, you got to get discipline under control. But to help kids, like what you were saying, you have to meet them where they are and to pay attention to how far have you raised them from where they were. So, for example, the typical kid at my school who's in high school who reads on a 4th grade level. Well, let's say if after a year, this student reads on a 5th or 6th grade level. Well, to me, that's something to celebrate about. That's something to brag about. But very little is actually being done, I feel, to help remediate those students. There's more money and effort being wasted on, as you said, trying to be friends with kids, trying to be on the kids' level. And so you have too many of these computer games as a result of the teachers trying to be on the kids' level, as a result of automatic pilot teaching. So you also have, I'd say, the negative parts of technology where they're giving you twice as much professional development through the computer that I would argue in person is worthless, but because you have to do extra on computer, that makes it even more worthless. And so when districts are providing people through technology with worthless public professional development, then that doesn't lead to positive student outcomes. The other argument that people make about charter schools is they say we don't want tax dollars going to private institutions. Well, think about all of the apps that teachers are using that school districts are paying for. Those are private. When you think about all the Chromebooks and the tablets that school districts are getting for kids. So I think that we're going to find ourselves in a place no different than where maybe 20 years ago, self-checkout was rare. But now it's so common because you have taken the cashier out of the equation. So if we get so addicted to this technology, we're going to have this false belief that we're not going to need actual teachers to help guide learning.
Right. It's sort of like well, they don't need to learn or memorize these facts because they can just Google it, you know? But when you don't actually know things and have knowledge in your head, you can't do anything. You can't think critically if you have nothing in your head to think critically about. You cannot replace learning the basics with Google. I don't think you can replace writing down notes and doing research in the library the old school way. I think that one of the reasons that I'm really good at searching on the internet is because I learned how to search really well through a library first. And same thing with teaching. You cannot just Google a lesson plan and be like, oh, yep, good, boom, boom, yeah, here we go. Because it's not good curriculum. It doesn't make structural sense. It doesn't build on top of each other when you're just plugging and playing lesson plans every single day. So yeah, I see the technology. I'm not anti computers. I'm not anti these things. I just think that we've gone super hard on every kid having a Chromebook, whereas we should go super hard on every kid learning how to read. And then, you know, you can throw some computer stuff in there once you've hit a certain level. And just
Well,
the
let me say
screens in
this.
general, like the kids spend way too much time looking at those screens. I think it messes with their brains and makes them crazy.
If you go to the PISA site, they say that kids who use their screens up to an hour, they score 49 points higher than students who use more screen time. And this is one of those things I think when you say what can be done administratively, get rid of the daggone phones. I swear one of the things I absolutely love to paraphrase is author Douglas Murray, who says that there are things that we knew yesterday, today we pretend not to know. And when I went to school, we had show and tell. That was the day you could bring your toys. If you brought your toy on any other day that wasn't show and tell, um, yeah, the teacher's going to say, you want me to keep this or tell your parents? Well, yeah, that's just one less toy that I have. Well, parents now are buying their kids these cell phones and pretending that they're not toys. And school districts are, and along with teacher unions, are pretending that they have more academic value than the negative social ramifications that already exist. In
Right. Yeah.
fact, at my school, kids aren't allowed to have a phone. The only way you can have a phone at my school as a student is, well, A, for medical reasons, but that don't happen, you know, um, really. And then you have the kids who go on co-op, they bring their phone when they come to school, they sign it in, they put it in a lockbox, and then they pick it up when they leave the school. And I think that overall, we need to be the adults again and to say, no, you don't need these toys in school. And so our over reliance on technology is to a detriment, I believe, because we're abusing it instead of using it the right way, just like any tool, no different than a gun.
I do think that there is a movement. I've seen a lot of Twitter announcements about districts considering policies to not have cell phones in schools or actually going through with it. Some headlines in the news. So perhaps there is some hope in the next 5 years that will start moving things in the right direction. Maybe it'll start with the cell phones and it'll go to the discipline and to teaching phonics. I know more schools are embracing phonics and the science of reading. So maybe there is some hope. I am also super hopeful about things like school choice, like the growth in homeschooling, because once there is just some pressure in the market that people have some other options and they see that they're within reach, then it will hopefully cause some of these traditional public schools to tighten up their game, to get their act together, and actually start serving their students instead of, like as you said, just being a jobs programs for teachers.
Well, one of the things I like the model where the money actually follows the student. Under a situation like that, I do believe you can have teachers who will be in the six-figure category easily. And generically, whether you're talking about senators, governors, local politicians, a lot of them rhetorically like to say, we have the best and the brightest teachers. Nobody has better teachers. And to me, if this was really true, then we would not need the 90 levels of administration that constantly put pressure on us to do things outside of actually teaching. Like when I am required to teach kids about their feelings and to ask them questions about their dating habits. That makes me uncomfortable.
Oh, well, it's Pride Month. You're supposed to take pride in those types of things. Um, I was told that it's I don't know. I got like some ridiculous comment on my Instagram. Somebody said that, oh, we don't talk about our sexuality, we talk about our romantic interests. I'm like, that's even worse, I think. Like, you did yourself no favors there. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of concerning trends. I think that across all different um, institutions in America, a lot of people don't have hope, but there were definitely some things in our conversation that do give me cause for hope. It's hard to see when you're in the middle of the storm that calm that comes, right? That rainbow that comes after the storm, well, we see plenty of rainbows now, but you know what I mean. So I'm trying to stay hopeful. I have to remain hopeful, especially when I think about things like the proliferation of, as we were talking about, school choice, the proliferation of homeschooling, and more people, more teachers like you. I mean, we were in a room with hundreds of teachers last summer who were either, some of them were very outspoken, some of them were just like, wow, there's actually other teachers out here like me. So I think the more we talk about it, the more that we find each other and have these conversations, that hope will build back up. And I'm so grateful for you coming on here. Where can people find you? Where can they support your campaign? And yeah, where can people check you out?
I have a Twitter. You can just put my name in Twitter and it should come up. I'm on Facebook. Same deal. I'm just a regular dude.
All right, cool. So you're just doing your campaign through Facebook. There's no website or anything that you
Oh
have so
yeah.
far?
Yeah, my website is votefordelvin.com.
All right, votefordelvin.com. I have his social media linked in the description down below, and I'll throw your website in there too. Go give him a follow. I'm sure you're accepting campaign donations, and anybody probably anywhere can do that. So go support Delvin, and hopefully we need more people like him taking action in their local communities, and that's how we're gonna save this country, turn things around. All right, Delvin,
That's right.
thank you so much for joining me. Thank you, everybody out there, for joining. Make sure you've hit that like button. I know Delvin's always big on getting that like button activated, and he was on here tonight, so we need for you guys to do a double time out there. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you're following me on social media. And until next time, think free, live free, and give all the glory to God.